And we're back. Bits and Bytes podcast. Super excited to be here. Number 10. I am Matt Scott with my co-host,
Joey Wensler.
And we got Adam Manzor with us today. I'm super pumped to have Adam here. Those of you that have seen the Bits and Bytes podcast before may have seen Adam. He made a guest appearance on an earlier version. So we're super lucky to have him here. We're going to be digging in. Just a brief reminder on the Bits and Bytes podcast. So we created this to share key updates, innovations, trends, and best practices in the technology space. Our goal is to create a community to learn and grow from one another. So we're super excited to have you here, Adam. Appreciate you making the trip across the U.S. to see us. So we are special over here. The Bits and Bytes is a special. Now, Adam came out here for a whole bunch of stuff, but we're going to claim that you came out here just exclusively for us.
Since I saw this setup, I was like, I can't, we got to do this at some point.
I love it. I love it. We got to be quick. He's got to catch a flight back because he's in and out just for the Bits and Bytes podcast. Right, Joey?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So super excited to be here today. You know, before we dig into stuff, Adam, I think it's best for some of our audience members that may not be as familiar with yourself, if you could give a little bit of background. I think it's really relevant to the conversation we're going to get into today.
Sure. So. Yeah. No, I started my career in cybersecurity. I started a company called Intelligo Networks in 2005. The mission in that company was basically to try to solve a lot of cybersecurity problems that kind of still existed back then. In the expense of technology, it was always about, unit economics and how could we disrupt that with maybe sort of building on something that was already there. Recently, chief security officer at ActZero for the last 4 years now. That has kind of put me in the way of a little bit of our, AI sort of revolution around cybersecurity, as well as, of course, regulatory compliance, which is a lot of, what I sort of consult on now with my team, which is a BCISO team at the company. So,
and you worked with Hal as a customer before that, right? Or like, how'd you guys work together?
Hal was the search party that was looking for a company to acquire at ActZero to make sure they could bolster their AI with data. And as an MSP, Intelligo Networks had a lot of that. So he was part of the group to evaluate and talk about the acquisition of the company.
Yes.
The Intelligo Networks company into ActZero.
You also ran an MSSP at one time or another before that, right?
Yeah. So at the time, Intelligo Networks, you couldn't just build all the software in cybersecurity. And that's going to be, a lot of what we talk about today is the supply chain in cyber and how that all works. But the idea is that no one vendor has ever made anything completely for cyber. And so we were partly MSP for the technology some customers had, and then building some stuff in the platform to try to make it, better, faster, stronger at finding and stopping threats. So a tradition that's continued after acquisition, obviously using AI, but just better engine this time.
It absolutely, we harness that in our managed service practice in the cybersecurity today here at Byteworks, where it's not one single, partner that is making up our whole offering within that practice. So that's great. I appreciate you doing that. So, we've been talking a little bit around how an MSSP can help organizations from a compliance standpoint. So hoping maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, maybe dig into how this may vary across different verticals, different customer sets, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. To start, there's a reason that, we held on to the BCISO practice, right? There's a reason that this has always been a function of almost any cybersecurity company. And that's because you usually start with a problem in the economics area, and then, if things get out of hand, you end up with regulation, right? And so when we look at a lot of the data that we've been kind of handling in IT for, long periods of times, we didn't really think about it. But as a lot of things started to evolve, right, you see sort of cloud providers, social media companies monetizing data in a passive way. So finding ways to build economic models with just hoarding a lot of things like private information. Where we host our information obviously is changing with the cloud.
Yeah.
And then of course, they start to look at the ways to threaten us with the data that they have. And it goes beyond, banking and credit card credentials. And now there's a lot of different ways you can threaten the company. So, as you look at those scope data, we call it scope data in the compliance world, meaning data that puts you at, regulatory enforcement, right? Things you have to do to protect very specific types of data. And that's really where the story begins for so many companies is in that. But like we talk about, right, when we say MSPs, right, what we're really saying is, remember the Looney Tunes cartoons with Wile E. Coyote, you always buy something from Acme Corp. An American company that makes everything. There is no American company that makes everything. Right? Yep. It is a supply chain. It's distributed. And so whenever you end up with, regulatory enforcement, it's a shortcut to work between suppliers. If you think about the way that you would say, okay, if all the parts of the car company, they're going to be tested by a third-party agency, right? All the things you put Boeing together, and the FAA will, investigate them to make sure that it's all, done correctly at the end, right? Or in the individual factories. That's what regulatory, compliance in its heart is trying to do, is to try to create almost a shortcut between suppliers to basically not have to create distributed enforcement across a gigantic ecosystem, right? And in the early 2000s, with Intellego, this was very prominent in the credit card industry, the payment card industry, data security standard, or the PCI DSS, as it's known now, started to, it was a consortium of Visa, MasterCard, Discover, the people that were issuing the credit cards, and frankly, probably, getting sick of all the losses that they were incurring from credit cards, basically meaning you could charge anybody anything, and there was nothing really in the middle to say, whose fault is it now? Is it the merchant? Is it the consumer? Is it the bank? The bank's writing off billions. They don't want to, they're sick of this. They can't enforce anything because the network isn't secured. The payment terminals aren't secured. People aren't looking at the signature at the back. So they bolstered the standard, right? And so we're in a similar position now. We saw it happen with healthcare, right? The second, it used to be hospitals could keep all your healthcare information in one hospital. And then they said, well, we want to be able to do portability. We want to take from one hospital to another. So you can go see a specialist, from Eisenhower to somewhere else, and they can...
You don't have to bring your floppy disk with you.
Yeah, you don't have to be like, I brought my records, right? They have your records, or they could get your records. But in that portability, in that new technology that would allow them to move data across the wires, we ended up with HIPAA as a standard, right? The Portability Act, right? And that's been there since the early 2000s. And then you have, the concept of that applying to new places, right? We saw it happen with personally identifiable information in California and New York, and each state AG has their own, breach notification requirements for companies as, they look at how to tell people that their data has been breached or that they've been collecting it, right? Mm. And so you have the data kind of being the starting position of what it is. The more you can threaten somebody with the data and the more they start to see that, that's typically when regulatory will sort of follow up.
Knowledge is power, right? And I think this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm seeing across different various industries or whatnot, this is changing fast. And, the government is trying to stay ahead of it from, a protection issue, changing by industry, Talk to us a little bit about, state ramp, of course, CMMC, and, what does that even mean for different government agencies versus even some of these smaller businesses? Because I feel like the government has control over a lot of the compliance with the government agencies, but yet when it comes to smaller businesses, they're next in line for where that's coming down. But more.
Yeah, I mean, when people think of the defense industrial base, they think of 20% of our income tax and, the multi-billion-dollar spend every year. And they think of 6 major companies, Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. They think of these defense contractors. But that's a lie, right? That's not the defense industrial base. The idea is that those are what we call primes. Those are the contractors that get the bids for things like F-35s and tanks and the Navy and, all the stuff we probably put into outer space to do Space Command. The idea behind that is that those companies don't operate by themselves. They're not Acme, right? They don't make everything. And so the idea is that the defense industrial base, which is the term for all the organizations that make up their suppliers, the subprimes, those are the other subprime. They're the ones that are 300,000 strong, right? And they can encompass anybody from a chicken farmer in Nebraska who supplies a forward operating base with food, right? And you think, well, what does that person have to do with national security? And the idea is that what they start to witness in terms of the loss, just like they did with PCI, who's at fault here?
How do they get in?
How do they get in? And it's not necessarily that person is networked, right? It's not that they're all in this big, massive web of interconnectivity. It's that they're all suppliers to one another. So if you increase the number of poultry to a base, there's probably somebody important visiting. And that's data you could take from their order manifest at the farmer's place. And therefore, now you start to see things like the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and other things, try to secure the base. But just like we talked about earlier, the idea is that it's a very distributed model for how we deliver services in anything. The supply chain is always large in any industry now. right? We specialize, we distribute, we scale up, and that's how we get the best prices, and that's how the economy is just sort of structured today. And that's not going to go away. So the idea is that you need a standard that would apply maybe at various levels to everybody that's in the defense industrial base at some point, should they have important information. And the more important the information, the higher the standard needs to be. If you make, a missile, that's probably a higher standard than a guy that makes bootlaces, right? But the idea is that they both are regulated.
Yeah, and Joey, that's what we were talking about with the various tiers before of level of compliance. Definitely. So they've been talking about CMMC for a long time, and what we're seeing as a managed service provider and support partner for many of our smaller businesses that service the government and have ties outside the U.S. is that a lot of people aren't ready for this. While they've been talking about it, they really don't know about it. What does it take? And so they're looking to us as an expert in this area to help make sure that they're compliant, as well as one of the requirements is a third-party audit, and it can't be from the person that's helping you make you compliant. That would be a little bit of a double standard, right? So we are seeing this become more and more enforceable now. We appreciate ActZero being a partner with us to protect our customers within that and to check the box on several of these compliant needs and the requirements. So what are you seeing from a standpoint of that, growing by various industry-wide and such?
It's always been a cybersecurity problem. So it starts as an economic problem, right? Where we say, look, we've got, federal acquisition. We have to go, the government doesn't make anything. Let's go buy it, right?
Yep.
So the idea is that they go out to the contractors and they say, you need to be FedRAMP certified, Federal Risk Authorization Management Program. It's a program that basically continuously audits suppliers that directly work with the government, right? And that program is small because it's very, very hard to pass 1,200 checks on a monthly basis. And if you don't, have any, high severity findings, you fall out of the program, right? It's very, very strict. So, obviously it's a giant barrier to entry to just jump into the federal, the RAMP program. But
by design,
because it's so sensitive. A lot of people will say, okay, was it regulatory capture, that this is a standard that benefits the massive suppliers that we have that can go through this program and stay in this program, and then they get all these juicy contracts, and then we're just sort of creating this monopolistic entity that stops people from getting in. And the truth is that even if that were true, like we talked about, that's not the whole supply chain. That's not who they are, really. It's not just Lockheed.
And what I mean by design is just to protect, to make sure that just anybody can't, just rubber stamp it and get involved.
Yes. It's very vetted. You have a government sponsor. There's an audit. There's a portal where you can check the status of this stuff. So they're very tightly controlling the information going back and forth, and they are scrutinizing those companies aggressively. But like I say, the program's really small. The program doesn't scale, right? You can't get everybody in the world certified on FedRAMP, even if you wanted to. The 300,000 organizations, that they're part of the defense industrial base, if they were going to go through FedRAMP authorization, I mean, the average price would be somewhere between $1 million per supplier. It just wouldn't work, right? To say that, as well as there's not enough employees to be sponsors in those departments. There's not enough time for us to do it quickly before something changes. And the other thing that's true is that while that was true, and the primes were doing some of that stuff, and that was mostly for people who were, directly exchanging, like cloud services and things like that. CMMC in 2020 was a response to, how do we scale this out? We're going to set up a different agency. It's going to do the education and the certification. And when they tried to basically say in version 1 in November of 2020, okay, this is it, guys. We've given you enough warning. We've given you the heads up. We told you what was in the draft. Any comments, they got 850 comments from a lot of the people that were in there trying to get the certification, or consultants like myself who are a registered practitioner with the organization, that said, what about the cloud? What about mobile? What about contractors? What about the super small fry that can't vet every employee or has to get a subcontractor that's part of a visa program, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And they said, wow.
And they said, pump the brakes. Let's take 9 to 24 months to figure this out. Fast forward to December of last year, right, the Boxing Day 23, and they hadn't made a lot of changes, frankly, but the standard is now in the Federal Register, meaning this is the law of the land. And the math for those suppliers is maybe there's some small amendments, but one of the things they kind of dog-fooded in there was a memo at the end. So imagine that you go through the defense industrial base and you say there's 300,000 people, 300,000 organizations that supply to these primes that then, contract directly in most cases. That's a big defense industrial base. Oh, but we forgot about a key person. We forgot about the software providers, right? As we're in the fourth industrial revolution right now, meaning AI, automation, the cloud, this is the standard. SaaS products, 1 million of these things are rolling out as fast as you can think, right? When's GPT-5 coming out? Are we on 4? Are we on 3, right?
Right.
And here's a concept of new services you can just automatically push out to customers that is the only thing they could buy, right? The idea is that you can't build a silo with Windows by itself anymore that has zero connectivity out to all these services and still utilize any of these features, right? So either you're not going to take advantage of the software as it's designed by the supplier, or we're going to have to keep accommodating, right? So the innovation is still going to go like this, and the standard, which hasn't been changed in 3 or 4 years, is going to be rolled out. And now we have to have this kind of process of amending this thing continuously, which is I think what has to happen. But one of the things that was released in December as well, as along with that going into the Federal Register, was something called a memo about FedRAMP authorization for cloud providers. And so much like we talked about with the FedRAMP agency not being able to scale, they basically said, well, you're still going to have to comply if you're a cloud provider, if you're an IT services provider, people like us and people like you, anybody that has access to your system, anybody that stores, transfers, or transmits or processes information on behalf of an organization, which is basically anybody who has access to your machine. It could be Zoom, just remote access. Please give me remote access. That's a cloud provider now. And so here's this even broader scale of services companies, IT services companies, that have an even more aggressive standard to comply with. And one of the major things that people don't realize is that those IT companies probably don't even know about it because they don't engage directly with the suppliers to hear about it.
Yep.
So many people are blissfully unaware that the IT department is now doing CMMC. They're unaware they have to ask everybody for FedRAMP moderate equivalence. They kind of sit there in the middle going, do I really need that? Is that a really serious requirement? Because so many suppliers don't have it. So they weren't the ones that were just caught off guard. Keep in mind, there was no warning shot. It's not like they told IT service providers en masse, hey, by the way, please check if you have these kinds of customers. We're going to be making a memo that says that everybody who you work with as a cloud provider needs to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent. They released a memo. It went, into a few blogs, and people who know, and people who don't know.
Yep.
But ignorance isn't a way to get outside of the law, right? So the idea is that, podcasts like this, conversations with people who know, we have to start spreading the word that this is how the future is going to be.
Well, even if they do know, a lot of them don't really know. They know about it, but they're looking to us,
of course,
to, essentially help them get there, to make sure that we as the experts are providing them with the checklist and helping them get there and ensuring that they are compliant versus, having it the other way around.
I mean, this is the reason for trying to build the unit economics around this, because even when you present a product to a customer and say, look, here's Microsoft, a seat at Microsoft can cost anywhere from $5 to $50, right?
Yep.
Depending on the features you plug into it. If you say to them, oh, here's something called GCC, would it get cash squared? Why is this thing so expensive? It doesn't make any sense to me why I'm paying 10 times the price in some cases for this SKU. Do I have to do that for every user? Is every user going to need this compliance? Can I switch tenants? I can't switch tenants. They didn't have that till very recently that they could even communicate.
Yep.
What about outside suppliers, sharing information? All the features of the Microsoft cloud, kind of come into question. And then you say, okay, what about Copilot? All these other things. And it starts to, immediately butt up against the standard and go, well, now things that are open to interpretation and the wide variety of changes that can happen in that ecosystem put a customer in the position of just pure anxiety, because they're not going and getting certification programs. They have nobody to ask into. There's no community for them where they can just sort of post. Where are you going to post this? The Microsoft forum? To me, there's not a lot of ways through it. And so it's going to come back to the managed security service provider, to the MSSP, right? And the idea behind that knowledge set is that you would not only have an understanding of the privacy regulations, the export regulations, the certification around data controlled unclassified information, which is where CMMC comes in. You'd also understand, how to build FedRAMP equivalents and how to demonstrate that when the time comes. And if, they find a lot of suppliers out there that they're in love with, et cetera, at some point, they're going to have to come up with an architecture if they have to have the supplier or they have to set up a particular way and still meet this compliance standard. You have to figure out the unit economics. And unfortunately, the unit economics, and what I mean by unit economics is that price tag for Office 365 and the price tag for all the goods and services and the amortization of things you've already bought are all going to come back to your balance sheet in this year if you're saying, oh, it's a rip and replace for the old environment. And they're going to make some pretty drastic decisions. How big is that? A lot of people said that federal contract isn't worth it. Or if I pad this, are you going to make me whole because you made me do this, right? So,
or is my business going to be shut down because I didn't?
Exactly. Or am I going to be out of compliance and then you're just going to cut the contract and give it to somebody else? And
eventually you're not going to have the business, right?
A lot of these regulations, I think, fail to really get teeth for this reason, is that they put too much onus on the regulated to buy more stuff that's more expensive. And as a result, they have to raise prices. And if they raise prices, they're not competitive. And so you don't want to kick the guy out in his garage that's trying to do something for the community, and you end up with this sort of capture system where it's only just giant suppliers. The giant suppliers don't want every business other, right? They don't want their businesses to be Acme Corp. So at some point, you need a regulation that is just enough to get the goal across without having too much, problems on the bottom end. And for a lot of those small businesses, there's nowhere else to turn. They almost have to go to an MSSP. There's just no way to structure unit economics.
You're right at my mind,
right? So that's why I think they're an essential part of that part of the ecosystem. Is it's got to happen fast, it's got to happen cheap, and it's got to happen correctly, right? With high quality, right? And we all know the good, fast, cheap triangle if you've ever renovated a kitchen, right?
You're the three, right? You get
three, right? But in this case, they can't afford it not to be all three, right?
Yeah.
So you really have one place to go. Where it's been done correctly, the unit economics has been figured out and filtered back to you as a service, right? And that's what a managed security service.
And you don't make the same mistakes. And I'm glad that you said the need of leveraging an MSSP like ourselves, because Joey, always has a rule. And I was literally thinking of that, and I didn't want it to be a pitch slap. We don't do any pitch slapping in here. That's not what it's about. But you're right. That is the value where ByteWorks comes into the mix here. And that is the value of what we always try to bring to our customers, is to help them be more informed, help them be, get where they need to get and want to get, and be that value added partner to them. That is a key word around here in ByteWorks from a value standpoint.
And I think the whole point behind the CMMC 2.0 was to make it easier and cheaper for the over 300,000 alone involved with the defense space. How does the chicken farmer from Iowa protect himself or herself from these upcoming changes? Because it's from my awareness that the consequences are going to start pouring in as early as Q1 of next year. Is that correct?
So the math behind, you imagine the structure having to have adapted. So what they did was they shrunk it from 5 maturity level controls. They added a little bit more guidance, and they brought it down to a few, right? And so most people who have federal contract information are at level 1. If you have controlled unclassified information, you're at level 2. There's this other area called controlled technical information. You would know if you were one of these people. If something's in outer space and you make it or flies.
If you have a username.
Yeah. Then you're probably in the control technical information. And technical information meaning satellites and things of that nature, right? So there are a couple of different classifications that determine your level. They shrank the levels to just a handful. And then the idea is that the rollout, as it was even scheduled in version 1, was supposed to be 23 bigger organizations, get Big Brother to do the certification first, show the little guy how it's done, give them the opportunity to go through the certification program, teach the auditors what we're going to be doing, maybe have them set up things, right? And if you imagine them, right, like it makes sense, because if you're the big prime that people are servicing, if you're building a screw for Lockheed, right, and Lockheed has designed an enclave or a virtual desktop infrastructure or some way they can, get you in and get you out to get the information, or this message will self-destruct.
Yep.
The idea is they would build the mechanisms into that rollout strategy to then get to the larger base, right? Which would probably be a multi-year rollout program. That was version 1. That was several years ago. So in version 2, right, which is now in the Federal Register as of December 26th of 23, the standards there, it's still, a couple of levels. The chicken farmer that's, sitting there wondering how they're going to work their government contract in or out of this compliance standard would probably need to take a look with a registered practitioner, right? There's a lot of people that are out there that can offer advice. We're offering advice, have an hour conversation for free kind of thing. Let them understand if they're in the requirements, what the requirements are of them, how they would most cost effectively structure any IT they have related to controlled unclassified information or federal contract information that they have, how they'd even know they have it, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever seen a controlled unclassified,
I don't know,
marking at the little C's and stuff, right? Most people don't even know what this document looks like, right? Yeah. And so this is another problem, unfortunately, with the fact that we're setting up a bunch of regulation around data, and the only people that actually manage the data in the company is usually IT. There's some users out there, but most of these standards just kind of get put on your desk, along with move me to the cloud or get me a new telephony system. Or,
it just happens.
What are you doing all day, bozo? Nothing's broken. Do something different, right? Like, so the idea behind the IT person that's sort of parked in the middle of this conversation is they haven't seen controlled unclassified information either. Right. And many of the users probably even don't know that that's what's going on. They're a manufacturer. They have a very specific CAD drawing. They build a certain thing. And, they know how to do that thing. Right. They went to school for engineering. Right. They came out of it. They know, rocket science or whatever it is. And they're plugging that into the machines that do that stuff. Right. They're advancing their science. And then all of a sudden, we say, well, actually, this is a protected part of the world now, or you created something that needs to be protected, or you're getting something that needs to be protected. And it has these markings, and they're abbreviated markings. It's not like it says the entire standard right on the page when you read it. And a lot of files don't have written words in it, right? A CAD drawing isn't publishing, it's not a Word document. So labeling and classification and distribution and all that other stuff kind of puts you in the middle. And if you have somebody that at least understands how those things kind of flow in, how the briefcase with the handcuffs is going to go from person to person, you can talk to the person that's maybe food services or, a subcontractor in manufacturing or something like that, and just say, okay, let me show you how to identify. This is how it's going to come in. This is what the scopes are. This is what your level is. Okay, it's an easy conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we actually offer that as a value add to a lot of customers and non-customers that we're talking to is, hey, where do you sit within CMMC? Let us help you identify. Let us help you kind of scope the plan. So we've been rolling that out. It's been very successful. We've had several, conversations where what's required, let's go through the list here and see where you sit. And it basically then is the next phase of, okay, we've identified it, how do we go act on it? As far as, people not knowing where they sit and whatnot.
And I empathize with them. Just to make one point on this, if you're in PCI, you know how many credit cards you process.
Yep.
And so you know what your level is. You just know because you can count it. But if you say to somebody, what's controlled unclassified information, you go to the website, the NARA website, which classifies all these documents, and it's incredibly generic, right? It's very easy to get lost in, is it or isn't it?
Yeah.
When is it? When is it not? Mm-hmm. If it's not labeled, when do I label it, right? And so because the classification scheme is so difficult, it's not a one mass 16-digit number that you can just toss into a transaction counter and say, how many of these do we have? This is it. I'm PCI level 1 or 4, right? Yeah. You end up with a problem with communicating. And so, I rarely ran into a customer when I was talking about PCI that they didn't know what their level was. Mm-hmm. Almost every customer in CMMC doesn't know what their level is, unless they've been completely, prescribed it by their supplier, right, already. So they're going to rely on somebody, and I feel like there's this culture of fear where they're afraid to ask their customer because it shows ignorance, right? Oh, wait a minute. You don't know what Lockheed Steel, have you not released the auditors, right? Or you don't want to ask who are you going to ask at the government, right? You're going to ask the DOD directly. What's the phone number, right? It's a
live chat. It's like when you go to the doctors nowadays, hey, we're going to rule a couple things out.
Yeah.
No, why don't we say what it is. No, oh, we don't say false diagnosis.
I'm worried, dude, should I talk about my shoulder? Or should I just focus on this? Like, so I mean, there is a culture of fear around here because they know the stakes are high, right? Or at least they feel the stakes are high. They're not even aware, is the program up and running? Am I going to get penalized now if I'm not complete? Right? Because the other weird thing about this standard was that it's been the standard, just self-assessed, for several years. And so while there hasn't been a certification and an attestation, an actual third party that would come in and do an audit of you, right? You were supposed to be following it the whole time, right? And so I'm sure just like, traffic rules or something, there is some, unless you have a cop there to tell you that you broke the law, you probably don't know you're doing it, right? Like, oh, I didn't signal between this third and second lane change. What's that mean, right? Like, so it's easy to cause an infraction, I think, and people are wary of that because they don't index this stuff every day. They're not reading it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, if you just looking at the 14 domains in CMMC 2.0, like if you're a business owner, how do you know if you're compliant with access control, awareness and training, incident response, personnel security, risk management, audit and accountability? So that's just 4 or 5 of them. So that's the danger of thinking, I think I'm good, and I'm one of those people that'll ask for forgiveness. Well, it might be easier to ask for permission and make sure you're on the up and up so you don't lose face and customers and contracts in the long run. And that's what is actually going to happen. They're not grading on a curve. It's met, not met, or does not apply, right?
Correct. And you have to remember for them, what's at stake, right? Why did they move from self-assessment to certification? A lot of people, they felt, were giving sort of these very hand-wavy answers about their assessments. And it's not hard. You can Google China's version of the F-35. It's identical, right? And how do they get that?
It's crazy.
What are we losing as part of this? If the defense industrial base is losing IP and it's 10-to-1 unit economics for adversaries to build it, or potential adversaries to build it, you end up with this very scary prospect, which is every innovation we have is going to be taken at a 90% discount everywhere else that could be potentially an adversary. We have to do something that is no longer just this hand wavy, I'm doing it, move along, right? We needed somebody to come in and put a stake in the ground and say, I'm going to base my own professional integrity on this. I have liability if I lie about it. I'm a third party, so there's no collusion, there's no vested interest, and I'm going to come in here and do a certification. The same thing was true with PCI, right? They ended up with qualified security assessors that would come in and do the same thing because while I believe that an agency, and this is the thing, they have to scale it out. They have to build basically an agency that will go and be the quality control for the standard. And that's what the CMMC-AB is, the accreditation body. And that group is the one that's going to build the training, and they're going to be the ones processing the certifications along with the DoD in some cases. But the idea is that you can't let people self-assess. There's just too much on the line. And while everybody can complain about the costs and try to wonder where it's going,
the risk is way worse.
It's risk transfer, right? What happens if we keep losing this fight? It's like ransomware, right? If you don't prepare now, it's pretty dramatic what happens later, right?
Yeah. And, Adam, too, it also goes with, like, you can't rely on everybody to fully understand everything, too. Like, they might think they're doing the correct thing, where having that secondary viewpoint.
I have never met a group of more well-meaning people than in this.
If you don't know, you don't know.
If you've never met these, lifetime, sometimes 25-year manufacturers, they've been working tirelessly on the engineering. They're believing in the greater good. They're there to support the war fighter. Like, it's an incredibly honorable cause. They're not a bunch of sleazy people that are like, whatever. Right. It's just not their bag, right? Yeah. It's just not what they know. So they want to help, but there's also a bunch of grifters, right? There's a bunch of ill-informed suppliers and software.
You're limited by what you know.
And so they can come in and just bamboozle these poor people in some cases into saying, we're going to get you CMMC compliant minutes, and this is what it's going to look like, and it's going to be this giant check that you have to cut us, and it's a carte blanche check because, I don't even know what I'm going to see till I get in there. It's the movie The Money Pit with Tom.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I love that movie. But just like that, it's only 2 weeks, and then they come back, and it's just a blank check every week, right? And unfortunately, because of the speed of execution and the fact that we've been delaying so long, the economics on the audit side are going to be, there wasn't that many auditors that went through the program the first time. And I kept warning people to try to get in early on something like DivCAC High or another certification that would automatically transform into the CMMC certification. I still do that. because what I think is going to happen is supply and demand. The second these people can get a gigantic check from Raytheon or somebody to go do these audits, that's where the money's going to go.
Yeah.
It's any business, right? Any business. If you're an auditor and you could audit somebody for $10 million or for $100,000, you're going to go over here. You just are, right? And so, unfortunately, when there's a small group of people, those initial people are going to be the ones that are going to end up spending the most because they weren't kind of prepared early with a few of the hacks. And I think that it speaks to the rollout program. The industry is going to try to protect them from that by going to the biggest, most richest people who have the biggest stake in this and probably the most important stuff anyway, the finished defense plans and stuff like that. Go after them and say, you certify first. And then they'll probably, then the unit economics will slowly peter out and QSAs won't be so expensive.
Yeah, no doubt. So I think that's really good. We spent a lot of time on CMMC because
we can.
Well, also
let's go through all 110 controllers. Who wants to start?
No,
forget the board.
But
all good.
But because of the need, right, and because of we were talking about how an MSSP helps companies ensure compliance, right? So that this is a big compliance.
It's also relevant, I think. I mean, you look at the top two talking items on almost any news feed, right? It's the multiple wars and it's inflation, right? And, if you're going to keep trying to cut costs and we have this kind of like looming extra cost driver and we're all worried about, potential conflicts around the world and what it means for the supply chain that is part of that, right? This is one of the standards that's going to fall directly in line with that, right? It's related to both of those things. So I feel like it's topical just because.
Totally.
But,
it's very relevant and definitely.
And it also just happens. So
well, it's
that of course is also
it's also going to. I mean, it's going to drive a lot of where people are going. One of the unique value propositions of where ActZero fits into the cybersecurity infrastructure and landscape, but like in this ever changing, ever evolving world that we're in, the value of having a security partner, that's going to be specialized in there. Give us your opinion on, and I guess that's probably even, I don't want to speak for you, but probably the reason why you're like all in on coming and helping to build out ActZero because of, where it fits within that.
Yeah, I mean, as a software developer, a lot of my friends got jobs at Apple, Google. They made video games, right? They were meeting people on a happy day of their life, and I took this job. And I keep every year. I'm like, I'll train my replacement. I'll find a way, but it just gets worse and worse. And I think that obviously the goal is to try to build an immune system for the internet, right? We're not going to stop working on this problem until we feel like it's sufficiently de-risked for people and organizations, and it's gotten a lot worse. But I'll speak to the innovation and where we sort of see the cat and mouse game, right? Because it is a game, right? At some point you are building against an adversary. They are evolving their stuff. You are evolving your stuff.
Yep.
And we are more and more reliant, right? You look at the Change Healthcare breach, right? How many hundreds of millions of dollars a day, or how much was the supply chain of all those people that were worried about it impacted by that. And when regulation shows up, right, it's slow. We're really just coming up with regulation for AI. We're kind of throwing things at the dartboard, copyright, and are we building something that can kill us all? We're just, we're not really sure where we want the regulation.
AI, can you help us write regulation?
Yeah, exactly. ChatGPT, how would you regulate yourself? I would eliminate all regulation. I think that the math on it has always been that, we're going to advance technology. That's going to advance risk, right? Always, right? Every tool can be used as a weapon. So at some point we're advancing risk and we need somebody to de-risk it. And the mission here was that the unit economics for the small business was always what was at play, right? Like I truly see this everywhere. The big guys could afford everything we were selling and already owned every version of it, right? And so by the time you kind of got to the small to medium, the adversaries had figured that out. I think really they figured it out in 2018, 2019, in that kind of stage to target them, because they could just take over and they could extract good.
It's in that SMB space.
Good money is in that SMB space, right? At the $1.8 million on average of a ransomware payout, right? They still want the whale hunting to make a name for themselves, the Alpha Bs and the Black Hats of the world that want to go target, United Health and GM and everybody else. And But the mainstay of the portfolio is these small to medium businesses that cannot buy their way out of this problem like the larger ones can. And they certainly can't just absorb the hit, right? And so because they can't take the body blow, they need to be very tactile, especially with their capital. So when you look at a company like ours, the unit economics was focused very much on the small to medium business. That was the one who needed us the most. That was the one that would allow us to operate the way we operate, which is full stack. And they needed it to be that way. Time has proven our thesis to be right. But you still have to lower the unit economics working at something like zero eternally as well. And so there was going to be some ways 4 years ago, before anybody was talking about machine learning or large language models, that was the thesis, right? Right at the time I got acquired, we were flirting with going to universities and getting machine learning into the policies for the security information event management. And then, Hal showed up at the door and said, wait, there's guys who've got way further. And so we kind of jumped in with a different approach to it. But the math there was that at some point you had to build an efficiency gain, right? In the first couple of years, it was a 25x efficiency gain that we built in the SOC using machine learning, right? We got patents out of the deal when we started talking about how to distribute, a response around different severity levels, which has always been a challenge for me as an MSP. Is you're never going to look at the medium alert and you're never going to look at the low alert, and the attacker knows it, so they're going to stay under the covers until the last minute when you're away on holiday, and then the whole thing just goes down because they've got control of everything, right? And that playbook just kept rolling out time and time again. And I'm like, everybody's focusing on the end result of the ransomware and saying the ransomware can be recovered with this, or the ransomware can be stopped with that. And you're like, it's not the ransomware. It's that they're getting in here and they own the place.
Access.
And they're just waiting for us to leave before they trash it, right? And so the math was you got to get them out of there early. And often. And so a lot of that was about surveilling things that otherwise would be there. And that's only really possible when you can scale the unit economics past the person that has to look at it.
That's right.
And so that's where we got into things like machine learning and AI. Now, where do I think the regulatory area is going to start to play a function here? We're not talking about the actual problem as it arises. We're always looking over the horizon at it. And I feel like that's a mistake. Right? We don't look at regulatory enforcement as a horizon problem. We look at what's able to be enforced today,
right now.
What is economically viable for the group, what can we all do to make this a lot better, how far does this go? And so if you think about things like people could turn on Copilot right now and they're like, the risk is some sort of data loss or some sort of productivity enhancement where people lose jobs. And so they see all these other risks. The person sees a risk, the company sees a risk. Heck, even I'm sure Microsoft sees a risk and saying, like, what happens if we release this in too many? What if we went open source? Would we lose our intellectual property? So there's a lot of different people looking at it from different angles, and that's bombarding the media space with what the risks are. But if you look at it from a cat and mouse game where we're just worried about getting ransomware again or getting data loss again, you can use a large language model to make source code that does that today, right? The gift of advancing the science is that you've now created a tool and maybe a weapon for somebody else. And those people will and can leverage it. We've already saw deepfake war dialing campaigns around the Democratic National Convention for the primary, where they had fake Biden calls going out to people. Right. We already see malware coming out of these engines. I make them. I'm going to be doing that at our the HIMSS event tomorrow.
The FBI was telling us that if they had 5 minutes of a voice, they could get 95% accuracy of, the whole conversation. Yeah,
and I think the idea is that they're almost going to like swoop in like a ghost, get 5 minutes and come out. And I think, I'm talking on this podcast for what has to be more than 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen. So, but the idea is that you're likely going to have audio of yourself somewhere, right? So what is a meta breach tomorrow?
That's right.
What is a, Snapchat or a WhatsApp or whatever, right? What is a breach of somewhere where we're already communicating audio, right? You record audio sometimes while you're driving. I'm sure a lot of people do this. Hey, Siri, text this back. I don't want to write it. I don't want to read it. I just want to say what the voice memo is. So we just voice memo each other back. Is that enough to create a sample accurate enough for your voice? And the deepfake problem is going to start to propagate an identity problem. Of course, we're going to have all kinds of other social engineering that's built from that. But it's also good at being able to probably index other things.
Great checks and balances, even as well. That's where have some kind of process around,
This
double checking your identity versus, hey, Joey, go send a check to Adam for $1 billion.
No matter what state we're in from a regulatory or a technology or whatever, cybersecurity has to be there the whole life cycle.
Yep.
We have to watch and protect the whole time. So let's say tomorrow that the idea behind advancing multi-factor authentication, which for a lot of companies is to go passwordless, right? They don't want to have this key that's stored in 2 places or can be generated or decrypted in 2 places. The key is nonsense. It's not reevaluated constantly, right? And so how are we going to move beyond the password? And many people put the context of like, oh, you're on this laptop and you're in this place, but those are simple metadata components you could easily lie to a system, because it's not like there's any encryption or security in that. It's just like, are you on this machine? Let me look at this place in the registry. Non-technically, though, if you said, okay, well, the answer is biometrics, if we can deep fake all the biometrics, because I can create an audio readout to your phone or a reasonable version of your face or a thumbprint from,
now that my
camera,
MacBook is taking
precisely, right? And it's not about, will the biometrics be infallible? They won't, right? Because the only reason the biometrics were infallible is because it was really hard to generate something that was accurate enough that it could take that data. But if you could do exactly that with these tools, then the biometrics thing is probably going to fall off the table, right? And so what's the next evolution if it's not, if authenticity cannot be verified in the biometrics? What's the evolution of that?
A microchip, Adam. A microchip in your forehead. I've read about this somewhere.
I already have one.
All right, I didn't really
on the list.
I'm sure you have that answer, but where we actually add a lot of value as well from a perspective of raising and heightening the secureness of these organizations is through security awareness trainings. And so here's how the proper way to act is. Here's how the proper, check and balance and verification goes and such. And so I know that those can be trained and learned as well, just as everything else we just talked about. But when you look at majority of these breaches, almost all of them come down to the person to some degree and some element.
Somebody asked me once when I was doing a talk, what do you think the future of the cybersecurity professional is? And we're trying to distribute this skill set across the organization because it's partially the link they clicked on. It's the email security admin that could have filtered that attachment. It's the EDR person that could have seen the click and the capture. It's the social media red team training the InfoSec guy could have had. And we're distributing it.
Yep.
Like everything we talked about, the idea is that we have to move cybersecurity into everyone's hands. We need this literacy, right? So many years ago, you could say, you didn't have a laptop, but you could still do a job, right? How many jobs today do you almost need it, right? Could you live without your smartphone 5 years ago? Yes. Is it incredibly difficult to do so now, or you can't even buy a concert ticket without it, right? So because we kind of got to this point where technology is so essential, it's not just technology literacy, it's cyber literacy that you are pushing between everybody, right? And you're doing that because the low-level scams, like the ones that just trick a user to clicking on a link or social engineer their password or whatever the next phase of this is going to look like, it's your liability, right? It's your bank account that's getting hacked even through your Google Chrome passwords. And it's also, your work that's getting shut down. And it's maybe not 100% incumbent on you to be able to do stuff, but everybody has to play their part, see something, say something, right? We saw this in national security after 9/11, right? Like we set up we try to communicate to everybody all at once, right? That the idea is that after a while, when certain groups that were responsible for the security keep failing because of scale, it's really hard to keep blocking all of these things when they're coming at us in every and all directions. And you can keep loosening the security protocols everywhere and making it even harder for us to do our jobs. That literacy has to pervade to everybody else, right? To bring the bar of hygiene up everywhere. So yes, security awareness training. Yes, leveling up IT to do more IT security things like the FedRAMP program for MSPs. The management of future case written down on a risk. We have to have a risk matrix that at some point says what happens if we don't have biometric. Because at some point these organizations also have to say what happens if we have to go back to paper.
Yeah.
Right. Like they have to have that. There's a plan, and most people kind of laugh at this. There's a plan for the zombie apocalypse. You can look it up. It's a real thing. And
what if it's a solar flare or an EMP or something?
Or an asteroid,
yes.
these are scenarios, however unlikely, the likelihood is not zero. And so the idea is that, you work through the ones that are most likely first, the user clicking on the phishing link or the attached Windows box looking at the internet or that contract.
Then you got ActZero backing you up, so that's going to...
And you have an insurance play with us to stop that, very simple level attack. And I'm not going to say we only block simple attacks. Not some of the most sophisticated stuff out there, but the math is you're not going to be watching for it, right? We have to be watching 24/7. We have to be able to find and block. We have to get them out of there early because where that phishing link goes after they click on it is this pervasive control of the network. You got to get people out there and not just at the recovery stage or ransomware stage and the data loss stage, which is where they're threatening you, right?
And one of the things that I want to make sure, a great conversation, but the real uniqueness and the value that ActZero is really delivering is, to your point, that machine learning and that AI leveraging. It's not just somebody developing it. It's constantly evolving.
It's a source of frustration too, because when you talk to people about cybersecurity literacy, they roll their eyes and go, I don't know, man, that's not my job. How quickly did the world become machine learning literate when ChatGPT showed up?
That's right.
How quickly?
That is my job.
And yeah, once it was their job, they were like, oh, large language models, what are we doing? We're accountants? How's that happen?
I want to be involved.
But now that it's your problem, all of a sudden the literacy, oh yeah, it doesn't matter that I used to be a lawyer. I know everything about tokens and machine learning, NVIDIA stock and everything about, processing machine learning. But it was an essential evolution, especially in the rules of like what to look at and how to look at stuff, that it could look at, thousands of things at once, right? And if you had that kind of visibility that you couldn't get out of a database or out of a SIM or out of a security analyst that, as bright as they are, would have to look at those things in sequence because they're a person.
Yeah.
It was a real gift to be able to increase efficiency and decrease, false positives and stuff like that. That moves us to a blocking state, which is where we want to be as much as possible. You want to be impenetrable, you got to find a block stuff that's coming at you.
Yep.
There's an ability to send stuff your way. So that was the math on it, and that's been quite successful for us.
Yeah, and we are proud to be a partner, MSSP, with ActZero, and really delivering that level of security to our customers. It's been a game changer, and definitely we are experiencing exactly what you're saying and seeing it firsthand. So partnership is awesome. We love the conversation, love having you get deeper with us. Hopefully we shared a lot of nuggets out there for everyone. We had some great conversation, and that's what the Bits and Bytes podcast is for. Appreciate everybody tuning in. This was podcast number 10. Adam, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Have me around for 100, right?
Yeah.
Don't wait till 100, but definitely have me here for 100.
No doubt. We are going to do that. Hey, Joey, we got to have like some big milestone celebrations as we hit these milestones. Right?
Yes, keg stands. You're all invited, every single one.
I was thinking gold watch, but
I like that too. So that's great. To all our Bits and Bytes podcast community, we love you. We will see you soon for Bits and Bytes episode 11. So thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you all soon.